Yeah, I shouldn't be allowed on eBay. But when I seen a listing for a 1997 Renishaw CNC computer, well, I couldn't help myself. You see, the thing that caught my eye is if we open the door, there's a set of 3.5-inch floppy drives in there. So is this just an industrial machine, or is this a computer based around an IBM compatible? I don't know. Let's tear it down and find out. So within this large, somewhat oil-soaked industrial box, what we have here seems to be split into two sections. The bottom half looks like it's all power supply stuff, and in fact in the background there we can see two labels. This one that reads 115 volts, the other one there it reads 230 volts. This all does come from within the UK though, and our single phase power standard is 230 volts, although within an industrial setting it's not uncommon for that to be stepped down to 115. So I suspect one of these mess of wires here is going to be the original power supply, 230 volt coming in. In fact, it may well be that one, which oddly is actually using newer core colours. We've got brown for live, blue for negative, and the green yellow for earth. Given the date of this thing, I would have expected red for live and black for neutral, but I can only assume it's been rewired at one point. Back inside here then, these two boxes, I would assume these are some sort of step down converter, taking our 230 volt and stepping it down to 115. In fact, just above that, at this point, there's a power strip, and these almost look like American style sockets. And I'm sure, as you know, the American power system is 110 volt. Those two aren't though, those are sort of standard kettle leads, male and female type. But it's not really that bit that we're interested in. Rather, it's this bit that's labelled computer module. And yes, while this was listed as a 1997 machine, there is a date on this, the 18th of November 1999. We have a couple of large flat ribbon cables coming out of it there, which seem to have been disconnected from some sort of daughter board. In fact, it looks as if some power has been disconnected from that board as well. So I'm not sure operationally what the condition of this is. It's this computer module that we're interested in though. We do have a guide here to take it out. Disconnect the incoming 110 volts. Well, we've pulled all of those wires out. Disconnect the round cables at the bottom of the computer module. I'll be honest and say I don't see any round cables. Disconnect the two ribbons, that's those things. Disconnect the green grounding wire. Well, it looks as if that has already been disconnected by someone. I dare say somebody has had this out before, which might not bode well for it. It might mean whatever's in here is dead. But let's just see how we get it out. Remove the two silver plated screws from the front of the computer module. Grip the module and by the finger, hold with one hand and slide the entire module out of the computer box. So just take those two screws out and pull. What's the worst that could happen? Now, I didn't notice this when it was in the case, but it does seem that there is a bit of damage to this. Just this top corner seems to be twisted a bit. I'm sure we could try and straighten it out. But more importantly, what is in here? I would assume we remove these 4 screws. And we do indeed have an IBM compatible PCI slots. That lines up with the 1999 badge on the front of this. And it looks as if we have a couple of expansion cards. These will be the CNC cards. Let's just take everything out and see what we've got. Standard ATX PSU, or well, I suppose it's maybe an AT PSU. We'll know better once we get this stripped down a bit further. We do have one 8-bit card here. It's got some wires plugged into it. That does not want to come out. No, of course it won't come out. This is industrial stuff after all. there are screws in there. Everything is screwed down. But now that we have this free, well, this 8-bit ISA card that I thought was maybe serial, well, it actually says on the back, video card. But given that we've got a DB9 and a DB25, well, I would assume that the 25 is in fact serial, but the DB9 here, and because it says a video card on the back, that must be like a CGA output. Let's look up the part number of the main controller I see here. HMC chip, part number HM6311Q. And so no, it's not a CGA graphics adapter, rather this is a monochrome graphics adapter. But that's not a serial port, that is a parallel port. We probably could have figured that out if we had traced all the wires and where they're going, but I'm just too keen to get this thing stripped down. So let's continue with that and pull out this large card. Actually, it looks as if this is a dual ISA card. And this, well, I would assume this is the CNC side of the computer. Or this is what would have been controlling the CNC equipment. We have a Motorola CPU here, a 68000, and we've got another Motorola chip here, an MC68681FN, a dual asynchronous receiver and transmitter, and there is one more large ISIC just underneath this. Let me see if I can separate these two boards. They seem to be mostly held together just by this large strip connector here. There's a couple of plastic screws in them as well, but taking that apart, we can see that the other large chip there, it is a Xilinx part. I would assume that is some sort of early FPGA. And having just put this back together again, I've noticed that it's just this top card that seems to do all the communication with the computer. If you look at the ISA slot there of the bottom card, well, there's no pins on that side of it. Rather, there's only a couple of pins on that bottom side. That would just be picking up the power rails. It seems this is a 2029A. Alright, that's the part number on it anyway. Certainly the part number on side B here. On the top board, it's a 15796-6. This, I would assume, is custom ROM set for this. It may even be some custom boot software here, like a custom BIOS. We will try all this later, but before we do that, I want to continue stripping this down. I want to try and get that motherboard out, which, given that it's got 4 ISA slots and 4 PCI slots, maybe socket 7, 1999. That's what I would hope anyway. I can see that we have an AMI BIOS just down in there. You'll see it better once I get this further stripped down. One thing that I am worried about though, is there a battery. And I think if we take the power supply out next, that will reveal quite a bit more of this. It does seem as if our PSU has been screwed in from this side. But there's the PSU. You can see a kettle lead going into it there. And indeed, you can see that it has been set to 115 volt. It's not a socket 7, that is a little bit disappointing. And we know that because it's only got 72 pin RAM slots there, with just one of those occupied. And indeed, I can see the CPU socket. It's a socket 3. Now, the PSU itself does seem to be AT. I dare say that was the power switch. It looks as if someone has cut that off and has just joined the wires in there. That would be my guess anyway. There's the AT connectors. And the whole thing has been cable tied to these grey wires going to this amp connector here, which itself is screwed onto that daughter board. I think all we'll do is just snip those cable ties. That should free up the power supply. There's power running to this board here, which is connected to that ribbon cable, taking signaling out to those various jacks that are on the side of the case, the side of the big case that is. I will show you that in a bit more detail later. But to fully disconnect that power supply, I next need to remove the 2 floppy drives. Again, these look like they've just been screwed in from the side here. And yep, that is the floppy drives free, so we can pull the power out of them. That just gets the power supply away, and we'll just disconnect the floppy ribbon from the motherboard to get this out of the way. And just because of the angle I'm sitting at here, I couldn't see it, but if we tip this up a bit, you can see that we've no battery issues to worry about. It would be a coin cell battery, but that coin cell has been removed. Again, making me wonder, has someone been in here working at this? Is there a fundamental issue with this board? So these various grey cables here are going to this large amp connector, which is going onto this board and ultimately this ribbon cable. So that's carrying PC speaker at that point. Then we've got the keyboard, AT keyboard. We've got that monochrome video display adapter going out there. And then this one, that is going to be serial, I think, which is going to that other bracket there. It's just integrated into the motherboard. Just been taken off the board through that last ribbon cable. That's going to be serial. Let's just get that motherboard out. Then we can take a closer look at what it is, how much RAM it's got, and most importantly, what that CPU is. So it's a US Logic Cardinal Baby AT, socket 3, has the 4 ISA, 4 PCI, like we said. There's integrated IDE, although that was never used on our CNC machine. Everything there just ran from floppy through the floppy drive interface. We've got the 2 serial ports on board and an onboard parallel port that again wasn't used. Rather, they used the one integrated into that display adapter. Oddly, this board has the Tigram chip installed, but doesn't have the actual cache itself installed. Now, according to the RetroWeb, this thing will support up to 512K of cache, and I might have spare cache chips that we could potentially put in here. It can support up to 128 meg of EDO RAM. The stick that we do have here, well, it's not obvious what size it is, but if I had to guess, I would say probably 4 megabytes. I'll try and Google those part numbers later. But I'm sure, like me, you're dying to know what the CPU is. Well, the only thing it says on the bottom there is i66. That heatsink looks like it's pretty well attached. Yeah, I can't get that off. I would say that is glued on there pretty tightly. But I'm going to have a guess and say that's an Intel DX266. Definitely not the socket 7, early Pentium that I was maybe hoping for. But certainly, not to be sniffed at. Decent motherboard. I don't have a 46 board with PCI slots, and the DX266 is a classic after all. It's running version 2.2 of the BIOS, which again, looking on the RetroWeb, that does seem to be the latest version of it. Now, one potential issue that I see here is that with this coming from a CNC environment, they're cutting metal, and I can see a couple of loose little flakes of metal lying on the board. There's one there, for example. So I suppose there is a chance that some, filings of metal have got into this and shorted it out, and it's just toast. That's the reason it was through on eBay. But there is only one way to find out. I'm going to give the whole thing a quick dusting just with the toothbrush. We'll stick that CPU and that RAM back in, and we'll try it. And if we're going to test it, well, we may as well try and use its own power supply. 200 watt PSU. Let me grab the multimeter and let's see what it's doing. And we'll just test this 5 volt first of all, just on one of the Molex connectors here. Now, as I said, I think this used to be the power switch, and I think the wires in there have just been joined to force this permanently on. So when I throw the switch on the wall, yeah, fan spinning, and we're getting 5.0809 volts. That seems okay. What's the 12 volt doing? Well, that's maybe a little low, although it could be because there's no load on this. Now, if we interrogate on the motherboard connector, blue there would be negative 12, and it's sitting at a similar level to what the positive 12 was. just, negative. And is there not negative 5 volts on this somewhere? Yeah, there's a negative 5 volt rail. That's the white wire, and again it's looking a little bit low. But as I say, it might just be because there's no load on this, so it can't regulate itself properly. But none of those voltage rails are wildly out of spec. I'd be happy enough to hook that up to the motherboard and try it. So as I'm sure you know, it's always black to black when connecting these up to a motherboard. And I suppose we're going to need to try and get video out of it. Now, we could try and use this, but I don't have any handy means of displaying a monochrome video output. I do have one monitor that will do it, a CRT monitor, but I'd rather just capture this for you. So instead we'll use a PCI VGA card. I've got this Matrox Mystique here. Then I can capture it using this thing. And so, does it work? No signal. Oh, yep. There we are. It is indeed 4 meg RAM. We're getting drive errors because they're not hooked up, but it does seem to be working. CPU, as we thought, i46DX2. What does -S mean? i46DX2-S? Ah, okay, so had to Google it, but the -S, that actually means it is a version of the CPU with system management mode, supposedly intended for laptops, but essentially it seems that it allows the BIOS to put the chip into like a low power mode, just to conserve energy when it's not in use. Does that make sense for the likes of an industrial machine, where this might be just powered on all day, but only used occasionally? So the thing can, ramp down its power usage, try and save a bit of energy. Or is that maybe just the case because this is actually quite a late 486 system, certainly going by that manufacturer label of 1999. And indeed, just looking over the motherboard for any date codes, well, there's a bit of logic in there and has a date code of 32nd week of 97. That one there has a date code of 98. And there is another one in there with a date code of 99. I didn't appreciate they were making 46 boards as late as that, but they obviously were because we've got one right in front of us. So since it started up, how about we put this card into it? If I remember correctly, it was in the bottom 2 slots. Now, I can't connect anything up to this because, I don't have any CNC equipment, but we can see if the card has any life in it. We'll plug in the floppy drives and we'll hook up a keyboard, because the one thing that I haven't actually shown yet is that this machine did come with some software. There were 2 discs in the drive. We have a system disk and then this disk, which I can only assume must have various CNC files on it. If memory serves, the bottom drive had the system disk in it and the top drive had this other disk. Let's see what it does. Well, we get a light on our CNC card. Machine still seems to boot okay. Both floppy drives have seeked. And it is booting, starting MS-DOS. And I don't know if you noticed that there, but there was a flash of activity out of those 3 LEDs. So that would make me think that this card works, or at least partly works anyway. Now, how do I use the AGE2 Auto Geometry Engine software? Well, the arrow keys don't seem to do much. Let's think about this. How would it work? F keys maybe? Yeah, okay, that has opened the first option on the menu there. And again, we can try to get it to do things, although it's flashing an error there. I don't really know what any of this means. Yeah, if we try to start something there, it thinks that emergency stop has been pressed. Obviously, there would have been a lot of hardware hanging off this, so you'll find that you know, 2 of these pins here is probably a set of contacts for an emergency stop button. Because nothing's connected here, it's seeing that as open. It thinks the emergency stop has been pressed. It isn't going to try and run. Not that it would be able to run anything anyway. How do we get out of this menu? Right, okay, after smashing every key on the keyboard, it is M that takes us back to the main menu. Well, can we try and read something off the other disk? So I would assume that is prog in, out. So that would be F7. Then we want to read from floppy. And yes, it is accessing that disk now. And yeah, there is a load of stuff on that. So I don't know. Let's just pick number 1. It is an MX2 file, so F2. And it has read that. So I assume then you would just go back to the main menu. And then we would try to run, which is F5. Start event. And again, it throws us the error because it thinks the emergency stop has been pressed. So coming back to this main box, I spent a bit of time tracing the cabling in it, and I think I figured out more how it works. In fact, these 2 things, which I thought initially might be step-down converters for the 115 volt, I don't think that's right. Rather, I think these are more likely to be drivers for the CNC motors. And the reason that I say that is that, as we thought, this wire here, I'm pretty sure this is the power supply to the whole system. That comes into the case at this point, runs to that fuse. So that would make sense, wouldn't it? You would fuse the power coming into something like this. But it comes through the fuse, through this set of terminal blocks here, down through this EMI filter, then back through this set of terminal blocks, which is labelled 115 volt, so that's not right. That would still be 230 volt at that point. And then that makes its way back out of the case to this wire. So whatever was doing the step down conversion from 230 to 115, it must have set external to this box. And that actually might make sense as to why the listing for this said that it didn't work, or didn't seem to work anyway. Because if you did power it up through this cable, it isn't going to do anything. Because ultimately all that does is connect to that. There must have been another box of tricks setting external to all of this, stepping down to 115 volt, into which I think this would have been plugged in, because that then comes back into the case onto that plug, which, as you might remember, that went onto the power strip. That was part of the computer module. But also plugged into that power strip then was these 2. Those are providing power directly to both of those things. Then from those, there's power coming out at those 2 points, but also these set of grey cables that's going up to this board, into which the 2 large ribbon cables were connected. And just on the other side of the case from that, well, you can see a series of connectors here, and presumably that would have went out to the CNC motors. So it definitely is a very interesting big box of tricks, but what are we going to do with it? Well, this might disappoint some of you, but no, I'm not going to set up an industrial CNC system. Because not only do I not have the space to do so, I also don't have any of the equipment. All we've got here is the computer. But from my point of view, that's what I'm most interested in. In fact, I'll put the offer out there. If anyone watching this wants the CNC side of this, you can have the big box, or you can just have the bits that are in it. You can have those 2 cards as well. I, though, am hanging on to this motherboard. And in fact, in this setup, and despite the fact that this is just a socket 346 board, I do think it is quite underutilized. Because this board, this is one of the more sought after socket 3s, and since it's got PCI slots on there, I think we could make a lot better use of this with a far faster processor, with some EDO memory. We could even put some cache in there, and I think we could build a really impressive gaming rig. What I might do though is hang on to the original industrial PC case, you know, the black case that was inside this, as in this thing, and try and repurpose this as some sort of industrial looking case. But we'll save all that for next time. For now though, I'd love to know your thoughts on what we discovered inside this. As I said, if anyone wants the CNC side of it, just let me know, you can have it. If you want this big box though, you're going to need to come here and get it. This thing weighs a ton. But yeah, it's up for offer, so just let me know. As for this video, that's going to be it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.